And we're live. Okay, let me just make sure this is all where it should be. And indeed, everything. Sorry for the delay. Just as it was set to go, my whole system freaked out on me. As has been known to happen. Mike. Here. I guess I'll start with the intro. And we're back. Let me just update the lower third. I'm sorry this is such a mess today. I was all set to go and all of a sudden my camera just died on me. It happens. So let's edit the text. How are we all doing, people? Text. So, now no longer interview, but now the new year. Welcome back to everyone. Good to see a good crowd in. Sorry for all the drama with the startup. There's always action here. So, in terms of what is going on, well, I thought a couple of announcements and whatnot. Well, so how did you all spend your end of year? I was in Australia. How are my sound levels, my visuals, there you are. How's everything working? Looks good to me. Let me just bring the comments down beside the camera so that I'm looking at you while I talk to you. It is working. So I guess a couple of things actually. It didn't even occur to me. I was going to get straight into the news, but I guess I should do announcements and whatnot first. And indeed, a little bit about the end of year. I spent the New Year period in Australia at my family home, at my mother's home, which is in Queensland, which is kind of like the Florida or the Texas of Australia. It was 41 degrees. 2 days before I left, and then I come back and it's like 5 degrees, all in Celsius, of course. I don't do Fahrenheit. Sorry, American people, but yes, I know you're having a very cold spell at the moment yourselves over there. I actually I was going to do a video on comparing Australia and Japan, or my impressions of Australia, having gone back for the first time in a while. And I took down some notes, actually. I kind of made a little some notes for a video. This might still become a video. One of my New Year's resolutions is I want to make more recorded videos, like well, I mean, let's face it. I mean, I don't know if you've heard the news. SXE Phil is going to wind up his show this year. I think it's been going for 5 years. Ray William Johnson also said that he's going to end his show. I take my cue more from SXE Phil. As I've said before, I appreciate most people don't like him, but, you know, he inspired me to start. So he gets credit for that. And I've always wanted to do a little bit of a short, newsy show, kind of on that sort of a model, only with less boobs or interestingness, you know, in my own kind of way. And yes, so that was one idea. You know what, I had a whole... So I've got my list of stuff from thoughts that I had when I was in Australia. But yes, so one of my ideas for the new year, I'm sorry I'm jumping around a bit at the moment, is I want to do at least one weekly kind of 4-minute news show based on my Flipboard magazine, which I've been advertising a little bit, and I want to explain that a little bit today as well. Basically, as you know, I do these I've been doing monthly aggregations of what I think the best news stories are. I've explained this before. I read a lot of stuff, and I like to tweet the stuff that I think is interesting for people to read. And then once every couple of weeks, I'll put together what I think the most interesting stuff that I tweeted was. So I kind of, you know, boil it down some more. And I put that into a monthly hikozine made up of basically Japan-related and Japanese language, but easy Japanese language, tech, geeky stuff, gadget stuff, and YouTube-related news. And I put it all into a magazine of about 100 articles per month. And then I did an end-of-year summary, boiled down for the whole of 2013. However, and that's kind of nice. It actually is like a magazine that way. You can actually read the whole thing. But one thing I've realized is that I get lots of people who subscribe to each one of the magazines, but if they only run for a month or they only contain a month's content and they don't get updated again, it's kind of pointless having those followers. Like, they have to follow again every month. So I figured from going forward, rather than have people resubscribe every time, make it easy. I'm just going to have a single magazine from now on. No more monthly editions, just Hikuzin. There's a link below. It is now the first magazine on the list, and it is the first, the last, the everything. There are monthly ones all for 2013, and I took all of the 2013 articles and I dumped them all in the 2014 one. But going forward, I'm just going to pick the best content and I'm going to put it into that. And I'm going to use that as the basis for topics that I will pick for this when I talk about news and when I do my news stories, and I'll just refer to that. So if you like these videos and you like the stuff that I talk about, check out Hikuzin. Link is in the list below, the Flipboard magazine. I think it's very simple. It's like flipboard.com/HikoSimon. Very straightforward. So yes, those are where I get the news stories that I've got from my cheat sheet here that I'm going to talk about today. However, before we begin, I guess I'll just run off some thoughts from going to Australia for a couple of weeks, doing nothing, enjoying the heat. So as someone who's lived in Australia, in Japan far too long, what are the things that stand out about Australia, particularly now? I don't really get the reverse culture shock anymore. I've been back and forth enough times, that doesn't really happen. But you get reminded of certain things. First thing is, I noticed that there are no vending machines, even where you expect there to be vending machines, like car parks. And it's like super hot in Australia, and I've got like a 4-year-old kid. So you expect there to be drinks available in most places. But truth is, you know, it's not Japan, and I guess the things would be vandalized or stuff would get stolen from them, and there are all those sorts of problems. Where they even had them, it wasn't clear if they had stock or not and how much they were worth. Vending machines are, the lack thereof is a real big thing. The biggest problem I have with moving outside of Japan now is actually lack of washlet toilets. Sorry about that, but they are necessary. Can't live without them. And yeah, I mean, it is, I was okay, I got by, but they're definitely one of the nice things to come back to in Japan, and one of the things that really should catch on everywhere. I think if people ever figured out how great they are. One thing I have a comment, people stare at you open mouth, especially in Queensland. There's like, and they make me think constantly like my fly must be open or something terrible. But they really do look straight at you and at each other. People watch a lot in Queensland. In Japan, people do pay attention to each other, but it's all kind of through peripheral vision. They're more discreet about it. Everything in Australia is casual and very easygoing. Easygoing isn't really a word you'd use for Japan a lot, at least not Tokyo. The public transport, I mean, in Japan, public transport is easy. In Australia, you do need cars. Clothes, they're fit, which is great. The food is fantastic for me. Solid meat. It's pretty much only because of the food, which I realize is a superficial reason to support the TPP, but I do. One thing about Australia as well, which is awesome, is that on SBS, every morning they show the 7 PM NHK news from the night before. So I recorded that every morning, and I could watch NHK news just like I do in Japan, which was kind of cool. It gave me a sense. I saw the big Shinkansen fire that happened in Yurakucho that blocked the whole Yamano. Oh, no, sorry, it wasn't the Shinkansen fire. It was a pachinko fire, but it was right beside the Shinkansen train tracks, and it stopped all the Yamanote line, the Kein-Toku line, the Tokaido line, and the Shinkansen line for like half a day and caused a lot of trouble. And it was from a pachinko place. I mean, of all the things. The other thing which really stood out to me about Australia was tattoos. Everybody has, like, especially young people now, everybody seems to have tattoos, and not just like a little teddy bear on the back of the neck or something, or on the lower leg, like full on, visible from the neck all the way down the arm, men and women. Some Japanese style, Yakuza style tats, some just random stuff. And really, I don't know. I mean, I'm not against tattoos altogether, and I think it can be done really, really well, and it can look cool, and I can appreciate. It's a big commitment that should take a lot of forethought to the people who do it. But given that it's clearly now happening as a fashion there, And I don't know. I don't know if there's any kind of fashion I was into that when I was about 20 that I would still like to have permanently inked on me now. Even, yes, you can have them lasered off and whatnot, but, you know, I think maybe it's just a sign that I'm getting middle-aged now that it just looks kind of, well, I wouldn't say in all cases, but in a lot of cases you have these people who just think they're probably not thinking this fully through. Including, of course, you're going to make your life in Japan if you ever get the idea of coming to Japan, you're going to make your life a lot more difficult. Not impossible, and there are people with a lot of tattoos like Unrested who manage. But yeah, you know, it is what it is. But it certainly stood out that, whoa, all the people, and not when I say people, young people, like early 20s, probably even late teens, are covering themselves, I think, not just a little bit. I was kind of like, whoa, I didn't notice that when I was here 2 years ago. So those are my thoughts on Australia. It was nice to come back. We stopped via Korea. Korea is trying to be a hub like Singapore or Dubai, and it could be that if they are able to speed up transit, long security queues and everything during transit, and you know they're getting Korea, Seoul, Incheon. You're getting that wrong. The thing about Singapore, you never wait when you go through Singapore because there are 20, passport checking routes at any given time at any given place. And I don't remember really ever having to wait in a queue for any memorable length of time going through Singapore. You do in Korea, and that's a big difference. That makes me not want to go through there, even though it is the quickest way to Australia at the moment. So yes, that is that. Hikosin, please, everybody do me a favor. Well, let's kind of do me a favor. I want the magazine. I'm going to really commit to this. I've been doing this for over a year now. So I think I've proven that this is not just a little thing that I'm going to stop doing. I've been doing this Flipboard magazine because I really do enjoy it for a year now. And since I'm doing that, I'd really like to get some followers for it and, get some attention drawn to it because, personally, I think it's awesome. I take a lot of pride in it. I try to pick really good stuff. I really want to try to draw on, get your recommendations. Tweet me and Facebook me articles that you think should go into it that should be shared or that you want to talk about, and I'll put them in. And those will go into the topics that will go into my videos. I want to do at least one in English, and I really want to do one recorded video in Japanese per week. So I want to try to up the output. But yes, so I'm sorry I'm not being very interactive yet, but these are the little catch-up bits. So let's get into the comments a little bit. Because of all the technical mess, I did not get time to look at the Facebook comments. Let's see if I've got Facebook comments. 3, so not a lot. I didn't give a lot of time for this because I was not that well prepared. It is the start of the new year, so give me some time to warm up, but not much. So that's good. That is good. So that means everything is on this thread. I've got my cheat sheet, but I can come back to that. So, by the way, just to recap, so basically the schedule is I'm going to do the show at 11 o'clock every Sunday. 10:30 is easier, is good in some ways because it's consistent with 2.5 Oyajis, but 11 o'clock's just easier, and it's the weekend. So 11 p.m. Sundays, Tokyo tonight. At 10:30 p.m. Every Wednesday, I'm going to do 2.5 Oyajis. 1 week here and 1 week no longer on Give Me a Flake Man. It's going to be on Give Me a Break Man this year. Victor's going to revive that channel. And that show's been going for like, what, 2.5 years now? It's been going for a long time, so you can see, consistency wins. I'm going to keep doing that. And I'm going to try to do one more show. I don't know, a recorded show, which I won't edit too much because I don't have that much time in my life, but I want to do a recorded short show and put that up maybe, I don't know, Friday, or maybe Saturday, maybe the day before this, so we can talk about, if there's any interesting topics from that, we can talk about the news topics that I introduced in the video before. Although look at this, I've already been talking for like, what, about 10 minutes, and how I can be concise enough to cram news into a 4-minute video. But that is a good goal to have. So anyway, there was actually a very good question at the very top of this comment thread by Michael Gillen Pickett. Good to see you. Good to have you here. And actually asking why NHK World, and not just World, I mean, why they use terms like collective self-defense instead of use of an army, which is a good question. I mean, he actually threw it out to the crowd. Yeah, just the general thing on that. So, of course, the Japanese Constitution, which was written by a bunch of American university students with a 1-week deadline, like a 5-day deadline during the occupation, just put in a very simple provision that Japan was not to have armed forces or to use force ever to resolve any international dispute ever again. You know, Article 9, the end of war clause. Lovely, lovely provision, you know, hailed around the world and by many people in Japan as, you know, one of the best constitutional clause ever, the only country ever to renounce war. The only minor problem with it being that technically Japan didn't do it. It was imposed on Japan by these students through MacArthur. Even America wanted Japan to do away with Article 9 like immediately when they realized when they had Vietnam and Korea and they wanted Japanese people to help them fight. But Japan was like, oh, no, we can't. We've got your constitution that you forced on us, and it doesn't let us. So it's actually worked out very well for Japan to not officially have that. But at the same time, Japan has had issues. I mean, in terms of, well, there was kind of mixed feelings, obviously, about disbanding the military, which they did, but they kind of put it back together with the self-defense forces. The problem with the self-defense forces is that they clearly contradict Article 9 of the Constitution, a fact that the far left in Japan, the Communist Party in particular, ironic, the communists are the biggest fan of America's constitution imposed on Japan. The far left, the socialists and the communists and the affiliates of the North Korean Workers' Party, they love the constitution. And they defend it, and it's actually the American allies on the far right that are trying to undo it. But they point out that self-defense forces are obviously and plainly, they contradict the Constitution. But in order to avoid, in order to play out this very forced fiction that Japan doesn't have a military, they do certain things. A typical military, a military has many definitions, but one of the important definitions of a military is that it has a complete supply line and completely independent of civilian structures, so it can, in a time of war or chaos, it can operate independently. The Japanese self-defense forces, they actually take the fuel tanks off the very expensive American warplanes that they buy to show that they only have limited range. They only purchase defensive weapons or short-range weapons that can only be used not to project power but only to defend itself. And they use terminology and nomenclature that always implies defense. Ironically, a lot of the stuff can be you just have to put more fuel tanks on an airplane to make it fly further. All the food stuff is purchased from regular supermarkets, which most, military, usually in most countries, I grew up in a military family, is all self-contained. But again, all the sort of stuff you can switch pretty easily. But the point is, by making everything self-defense, that means that you keep playing on the fiction that it's not really a military, it's just a simple, advanced self-defense force, and that these are just civil servants. The collective self-defense thing all comes back to the Gulf War, the 1990 Gulf War, the original one. That was it was actually credit to Bush Sr. That was one of the most remarkable military coalitions probably since World War II, even maybe on a par with World War II. In terms of, he actually had a military alliance, and think about this, it had everybody, New Zealand, Australia, America, Canada, Britain, France, but they also had the Arab countries. They had Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Syria. Even Syria was coordinating with the US in a huge alliance, all attacking Iraq in 1990. And at that time, Japan only sent money to support, and this was called, the justification for this whole war and this whole alliance was collective self-defense. This isn't a Japanese term. This is a diplomatic term at the time. This whole idea that, everyone was collectively helping to defend Kuwait because they all agreed defending Kuwait and defending, the price of oil was a good idea. And Japan clearly realized that it wasn't allowed to participate directly in this, but, they wanted to help out, so they sent money. And Japan was pretty roundly mocked and condemned by, everybody, that it was just checkbook diplomacy. Japan was just fobbing off its responsibilities by sending money through ODA everywhere. And that really hit home in Japan. And, Japan started participating in peacekeeping ever since that. But again, they only did peacekeeping because they figured that UN-sanctioned and UN-declared peace zone peacekeeping was about the limit of what they could do. And they sent some people to Cambodia, I think was the first overseas peacekeeping that they did, and some of their people got shot when that happened. And then, the Asahi Shimbun and all the left-wing papers said, this is what you get for violating the Constitution. These people were breaking the Constitution and they got killed. And it was actually, very polarizing. They were very unsympathetic to the people who, got killed really doing a good thing. But what the current government's agenda is to extend the definition of self-defense to collective self-defense, i.e. the kind of collective, very forced definitions of self-defense that, included these kind of UN sanctioned and mandated actions that happened in the Gulf War, Afghanistan, for example. And basically all this is going towards having Japan becoming a normal militarized country just like anybody else, just like South Korea, just like Britain, just like France. And all the elements are already there for that. Right now in South Sudan, as in many UN peacekeeping areas, Japan sends uniformed soldiers, engineers, doctors, so on. They are all from the self-defense forces. They just don't go there to shoot people. They do everything but actual peacekeeping. And it's actually kind of embarrassing because, Japan sends civil engineers and doctors, and they require other peacekeepers who should be peacekeeping and defending local civilians, and they have to defend the Japanese peacekeepers instead. And this is all part of the fiction of Japan's role. But Japan wants to do what it can do. It's got a professional military, even though it's not allowed to say that it has one, and it can help protect civilians and play a part just like all these other countries, like New Zealand does, like Australia does. And why shouldn't it? Because the Constitution currently prohibits it, but this is something that Abe wants to change. And this whole debate around allowing collective self-defense and modifying the interpretation of the Constitution that it's currently interpreted to allow self-defense, and so they currently are looking at reinterpreting or modifying the Constitution to recognize enhanced collective self-defense. So it's a term of art and it's a diplomatic term, but they want to put that under the Constitution, which would basically allow Japan to act in a more normal way. It still would be constitutionally prohibited from actually invading or attacking anyone, although frankly, let's face it, while diplomats consider the war in Afghanistan to be a collective self-defense action, or the recent invasion of Iraq to be a collective self-defense, it's an invasion. Of course it's an invasion. So frankly, it's going to be the end of all that. But that's why that term is used. Because it's unconstitutional to say otherwise, and that's what they're trying to get in Japan right now. Comments are updating slowly at the moment. I'm seeing, hey everyone, it's a fashion here in Denmark as well. The tattoo thing, I think it's really going around everywhere. And Chris himself mentions leather jogging pants, which he's from Germany, and I guess that kind of makes sense. I'm not with Lederhosen, I hope. It's all cool with me. German people are totally cool. Good to see you, by the way, Chris. Ahmed Zombia, I know that you were suggesting, that's a good question as well, why are Japanese houses so badly insulated? I don't know. I think what it partly comes down to is they expect earthquakes all the time. Houses just they're not built to stay up for more than 20 years. If they somehow make it up 20 years without being destroyed in a quake or a tsunami, they knock them down and rebuild them anyway. And so luxurious costs like insulation, they just don't seem to spend on. Doesn't make sense to me at all. I come from a country without Japan's extreme climate, and we take insulation very seriously. And for all sorts of reasons. It saves you on power costs, it saves you, it keeps the house warm. Japan, they've got these fantastic, like in these houses, a lot of them use like these gas heaters with an actual like flame and stuff. They can cause carbon monoxide poisoning and burn down houses easily, and you keep a lot of fuel in the house, which isn't good if you have fires. And they keep one room superheated and the rest of the house is super cold, and I've never gotten, I don't get it. It is improving, and it's one of those things I think now people are becoming more aware of and they look for in new houses. But, it's still, I don't know why. I think it's just people save costs a lot on building, and it's not a smart area to save costs. And Ahmed Zomiya, I know you're very much into talking about wealth disparity, and you've got a very good the 1%. You've sent me a lot of videos on this, and I think they're very interesting as well, talking about the ultra rich elite. I've given my thoughts on that. With Japan, it's kind of interesting. Japan is it's one of the things I've heard from Taichi Sakaya, who's one of my original inspirations when it comes to Japanese political thought, that points out that Japan, mainly through the inheritance tax, has made a very flat society, or they've been very good at redistributing wealth. Japan has one of the most severe, I don't know the rate, but it is really high. It is like 70% or something, the inheritance tax rate. That is to say, if you die, your family has to pay 70% tax on whatever the assets that are left over. So, you know, if you die all of a sudden and you're rich, or especially even more so, if you're one of the old aristocratic families, Japan used to have a whole big royal family just like Britain. After the war, they decided to cut it down just to a few families very close to the emperor. But all those families had all of these old assets, you know, which are valued a lot of money, but they instituted this very high inheritance tax, which meant that all those families would become instantly bankrupt the moment that anybody at the top of the family died. So they had no choice but to sell off all of those assets, which were causing that high inheritance tax to pay off. And all of that money, of course, went into things like construction, infrastructure building. A lot of it just went back to the state when people couldn't pay their taxes. So it's had probably that more than anything else. Japan's got relatively low income taxes, but it still has done a lot of wealth redistribution. It's been very successful. Relatively, if you take the top and bottom 10%, the differential in Japan, as I understand, if you take it at the 10% level, not the 1% level, but at the 10% level, Japan's wealth differential is very, very low. It's like 4 or 5 times compared to Europe or America, where you have, even at 10%, I understand that you have like 15, 20 times. Much different. And yeah, and the economy stuff at the moment, Japan, you know, it's not good, but geez, I mean, it's not Europe. And Europe is kind of freaky, isn't it? You know, yeah, there is that wealth inequality. It's a good topic. It's very interesting. Hafid Belk is asking about anti-piracy laws and copy protection in Japan, P2P networks and sharing sites. There's a lot of hysteria about it, but the laws, they're there. They're fairly aggressive, but I don't know how strictly they're enforced. The press and everything is very stage managed in Japan, so the few cases that have gone out have gotten a lot of attention. But, you know, I don't know if they're really, they haven't been that enforced. So yeah, Ryan Cabal, good to see you, man. Magego's X, just asking about Hikuzin, just as I mentioned before. I've got a favor to ask to people, actually. If you have an iPhone, or actually an Android, or almost anything that's out there, Flipboard, it really is. It's the best news app, or it's the best reader app. And go on there and subscribe to my mag, if you don't mind. I've got a link down below which can take you straight to it. If you can follow it, like I said, I'm going to keep this really now well updated, and it gives you instant stuff to talk to me about. And again, I love to get your topics together. It's just it's my thing. I like to read news, and I like to talk about news and politics and cool stuff. I will get to talking about CES soon. Let's see what the latest topics are. Tokyo Sonata, good to see you. Boom. Ryan Cabal mentions the Sony RX100 Mark II. Very good camera. Of course, I'm a video guy, so I need the flip around viewfinder, and it's not there. But apart from that, it's awesome. I actually like the idea, the concept of those little round lenses that you can attach to a smartphone. And see that as being something which, going forward, that kind of camera could be very, very interesting. I'm sure there have been comments as leather jogging pants, so I am going to refresh. Easy to refresh when you're like this. And as expected, yes, there are a lot of comments. YouTube, get your comments sorted out. Hey, Leonard Bryn, good to see you, man. Zeros Nico, hey, I owe you an email as well. But yes, coming to Japan from Uruguay. Never been to Uruguay, actually. Would really like to go. I've been to Buenos Aires and Argentina. Totally different, I know, of course, Uruguay, but same thing with the meat and good-looking ladies, from what I understand. So, you know, no, interesting, good guy. Yeah. They've got Shudan Boeiken as a collective self-defense, KHKNYS. But yes, very big topic of news at the moment. And 1, 2, 3, 4 ODR. What causes the desire for new in Japan? Well, that's an interesting question. I can tell you from having lived here and you know, kind of experiencing it, there is a sense, one, that apartments are things like, you know, everything is temporary in Japan. I mean, everything. You know, if it's not an earthquake, it's a tsunami. If it's not a tsunami, it's a typhoon. If it's not a typhoon, it's a Godzilla. But, you know, everything gets destroyed. Nothing is considered permanent. You build a house in Australia or America, that house is permanent. you build a house in Japan, nothing stays around for more than 20, 30 years. So there's no tradition of that. So I guess there's this thing that people are not used to buying, second-hand houses or second-hand anything. There's that. There's also the Japanese heightened sensitivity and awareness of kuris, which there's a sense that kind of somehow everything is kind of sullied if it's been touched by anyone else, including apartments. I mean, a lot of people rent apartments, but if you're going to buy, everyone likes to buy. It's true as well that things like with cars and so on, that's been very deliberately and politically engineered to support the car manufacturing industry, to make the car registration system so expensive to renew old cars that it's more economic to sell your car, have it sent overseas, and to buy a new car. But I think it's just a thing that people feel like old stuff is kind of grungy and they don't like it, and there is this idea that people like new stuff, which leads to two problems. It means that things like houses aren't really made to last a long time necessarily in a lot of cases. So you got to be a little bit careful buying secondhand. People don't repaint houses. You see a lot of houses that, in New Zealand, everyone repaints their house every few years because the sun is so harsh, but also you expect to look after a house for 100 years. Whereas in Japan, people just let it kind of go to hell. So you'd expect if you bought a new house, things like, clogged drains and, just stuff from not looking after. Same with cars. I know Japanese people who've owned cars have never put air in the tires, they've never changed the oil. They'll just, as soon as it needs an oil change, they'll sell it. As soon as a house has drains that needs changing, they'll buy a new house. Which is kind of it's just a different outlook on stuff. I don't think that's traditionally what it's like in Japan per se. Japan was a kind of, during Edo period, it was a relatively, well, in some ways it was a very ecologically sensitive kind of a, place, but that certainly is the way that it is today. It's an interesting point, 1, 2, 3, 4 ODI, it's a good topic. Ahmed Zombia, it's, the redistribution of wealth in Japan, it's one of the better, you could say that it appears to be one of the more successful at redistributing wealth. And it's interesting, this comes back to the topic that I talk with you about on Facebook, about the old-fashioned social contract, the idea that, at least in the old days of real tycoons, uber wealthy in the 19th century in America, I think there was an awareness that they had a very precarious existence, that, with such a large populace and things like an economic depression, that could cause them to very easily turn on the rich people, and especially with this happening all over Europe at that time with the communist revolutions, they all realized that they had to justify their existence by kind of being into charities and, funding this foundation of the UN and, building libraries and hospitals and so on in order to justify being allowed to have such wealth. In Japan, rather than having this kind of tycoon type thing, but there is this overall still recognition that wealth should be redistributed, and wealthy people in Japan, in not all cases, but certainly in a lot of cases, especially for established wealth, are very discreet. You don't often see gold painted, Mercedes Benzes and so on. The most expensive, the most exclusive car, really driven by, if you talk about the presidents or owners of the largest corporations, they drive Toyota Centuries, which are handmade V12 Toyotas. But they're based on a 1970 Toyota Corona design. They're the most anonymous looking cars. So there's kind of a culture thing as well about there is hidden wealth, a lot of hidden wealth in Japan, but people are very careful about not flashing it around too much. And there is an overall sensitivity. Japan is a very heavily governed, and maybe, I think the argument of Taichi Sakaya is that Japan was over-governed and that they were so successful at redistributing wealth that, people were kind of losing their motivation to strive, which is interesting. And, I can see aspects of that. But yes, Japan's an interesting look at, another example of a kind of socialist, capitalist democracy. It's a lot of paradoxes and a lot of self-contradictions, but it's very interesting. Leonard Brunn talking in Sweden, the apartment's so well insulated that you don't even need the radiators on in winter, which is how it should be. And you think of how freezing cold most of Japan is. It doesn't make any sense to me. And I've heard stories from people who have had Like they've paid builders to put insulation, like insulating bats in the roof. They pay them a lot of money, and they go up to check after the work was supposedly done, and they find that they're still all rolled up and they've just been thrown up there. A lot of dodgy builders and so on that just don't do the job properly. Yeah. And KNYS. Talking again about exactly what is it, seizing, and you know what, it's something new, but I don't know that. But yes, inheriting assets while alive. Certainly, if you are smart, you try to transfer as much of your wealth to your family while you're alive as possible, and you don't want to die prematurely. A lot of Japanese don't, of course. They live to be very old, which is good. Stamps 9K asking if I saw the Ashes in Australia. Well, I was planning to watch the Ashes from the 4th day. Who would have expected England would actually lose by 280 runs on the 3rd day? Yeah, it was terrible. Yeah. I'm not really a fan of Australian cricket just because they're so strong. And I'm not really a fan of English cricket either. So I wasn't that drawn to the cricket, but I was going to watch it because I thought it would at least be interesting. But, man, you guys got creamed by the Australians. And Zero Sneaker, thanks for the kind words about Hikazine. So, speaking of Hikazine, and some stuff I'm going to go and put some updates into, but in terms of stuff that's in there at the moment, and again, a rush of comments now, but so let's just go through. The bullet fiasco has finally come to an end as of yesterday. I mentioned this on 2.5 Oyajis, but I'll tell that very, very quickly, tell the story again. Kind of symbolizes the state of relations in some ways. I mean, this started out as a good news story. And I have a lot of Korean friends, a lot of Japanese friends. I actually think it's really interesting. The more that you learn about Japanese history, and we have this idea, which is the same as it's educated in Korea, that Japan's colonial history of its relations with its near neighbors are almost pure evil. Like they were the Asian Nazis. I mean, that's what we're taught, and that's what they're taught in China and Korea now. But you read a lot about it. It wasn't all, as of course makes perfectly logical sense. It was always a lot more nuanced than that, actually. There's a lot of bad stuff, and there was some good stuff, and there were a lot, but the narrative of that history has been kind of boiled down, very simplified, to being very negative. Truth is, there were a lot of friendly, good ties, as you would expect to have happen. Again, those people in Korea, they have a family associated with collaborators with the Japanese government. There's now like a really poisonous term, which makes it ironic that the current president made it to be president when her father was actually in the Japanese military and was a Japanophile military dictator of South Korea. But that aside, there's a lot of history of, the fact that there's almost 1 million Koreans living in Japan who voluntarily, I mean, yes, there's a lot who are brought over here as workers, slaves. They're unpaid workers during the forced labor. There are also a lot of Koreans who moved to Japan for economic reasons or just for wanting to live in Japan and have since the war. There's a lot of people who in Korea who are friendly towards Japan and vice versa. And for some reason, for politics or whatever, the emphasis always goes towards the hate and the negativity. And then there's a lot of stuff to hate and a lot of stuff to be negative about, but there's a lot of stuff to focus on, positive to focus on if you want to. But politics doesn't seem to allow it. And that frustrates me because I really want them to be positive to one another. And this is where this story encapsulates that whole thing perfectly. So in South Sudan, I was just talking about peacekeeping, Japan's kind of restrained participation in peacekeeping. In South Sudan, South Koreans are there doing regular peacekeeping. They're the only forces in one of the larger provinces there. Japanese are there as civil engineers in another province receiving protection from another African country's troops. And it turns out that, as you may have heard in the news over Christmas, everything kind of went to hell. There was kind of all of a sudden a civil conflict started up in South Sudan. And all of a sudden the South Korean forces found themselves short of supplies and ammunition and having to protect hundreds of thousands of refugees. And they were short of ammunition. They were short of materials and supplies from their own government. And because of the emergency situation, they apparently picked up the phone. They contacted the Japanese forces in the capital who were the only people also in South Sudan who used the same types of bullets that they used. And they said, look, we need ammunition, we're short of rounds, and we need to protect a lot of these refugees. You know, everything here is turning to custard. Japanese said, sure, what do you need? And they said, well, we'd like 100,000 rounds of these bullets that we use. So Japan arranged through the United Nations, they gathered up the ammunition, they had enough stock. I don't know why civil engineers, well, I guess they are military, and they did have the bullets, so they gave them to the UN, and through the UN they transferred them to the Korean forces. The Korean forces sent a message to the Japanese forces saying, thank you so much for this. This is a symbol of the goodwill and the good, the good spirit between our two countries. And I remember I was interacting in Japanese on the net with some Japanese people saying some, ragging on Korea as usual. I'm saying, well, look at this. Some Koreans are actually really nice, and, we can actually get along and work well with Korea. Look at this, helping refugees together by sharing materials in Africa on a peacekeeping mission. Real good feel-good story. I mean, really the sort of way that the relationship should be. It shows that whatever the politics, they can work together and be really positive and help one another on the ground level. As it turned out, however, the Abe administration said this is a perfect example of why Japan needs to revise its rules that prohibit exporting of weapons and ammunition, which this broke. And this is exactly the sort of reason why we need to change our laws to have a normal military. Obviously, Abe, as you all know, he recently polled in South Korea as being less popular in South Korea than Kim Jong-un. As far as I know, Abe hasn't fed anyone to, any relatives to any dogs. They talked about that uncle of Kim Jong-un who got fed to like 120 starving hounds. The Japanese web picked that up and was asking, are they sure it wasn't 101 Dalmatians? Pretty horrible anyway. I'm pretty sure in Japan they'd probably somehow they'd put a Disney spin on it. They'd use Dalmatians, I think, and lower the number. But, Abe is actually more vilified and more seen as less popular than Kim Jong-un. And I admit, the guy has some wacky politics, but geez, this is a bit out of proportion. But anyway, so all of these people saying, how could the Korean government give Abe a propaganda piece for changing the laws about, for remilitarizing Japan, which is what all the hysteria over there at the moment is, that Japan's becoming, remilitarizing, which it kind of is, but really not like the way that they think. It's just going through a process of normalization. And so first they denied it, and then they said that Japan forced the bullets on them, and that they never asked for them. And then they found out that they actually did give them to them. And it was because the government didn't give their own people enough bullets. And, in the end, yesterday it all ended with where new supplies finally arrived from Korea. And when they arrived in Africa, the Korean military gave the bullets back to Japan. The symbol of the good feeling between the two countries was returned, which is just so petty and so stupid. Arguably, some degree by both sides, but unfortunately it just shows how hopeless things are, and especially you take the example, Abe said himself he was really looking forward to Park becoming president, because his dad, who was at one time charged with war crimes, although he was let off, was good friends with the president with her dad, who himself was in the Japanese military and would have been interred at Yasukuni had he died during the war, but he didn't. He actually got to survive and become a military dictator of South Korea who killed hundreds of people and accepted compensation money for the comfort woman. But no, so she wants nothing to do with him, probably because she doesn't want to draw attention to that part of her own background. But yeah, really, really you have to actually force your own peacekeepers who are trying to protect people in Africa from actually receiving bullets to protect them in order to spite Japan. How? So it all got a bit silly, but fortunately it ended the other day. Well, fortunately, it's a horrible way for it to end, and it started as a feel-good story and it ended up as like that. But I don't know. On the positive side, things can only get better from this point, I think. By the way, has anyone checked out the trailer for the Simpsons episode with a bunch of tributes to Hayao Miyazaki? I've only seen like a 3-minute clip, but it looked really, really awesome. That show has been on for like, what, 25 years? I remember that show when it was like a 30-second bit on the Tracy Ullman show. and Homer had a different voice. You know, it was just a little clip which would happen in the middle of the Tracy Ullman show, and it's amazing. I mean, you know, I don't get to watch it very often here still, but yeah, it looked really, really brilliantly done. It would make me want to go and check how they've done that again. Other news, interesting stuff. There was I don't know if did anyone see the Kanagawa TV show, children's show, which had a woman dancing. She was on all weekend. She was wearing the same costume all week, and it had writing on it which said things like I heart cock and pussy, and what was the other phrase? I wrote, yes, fuck yeah. It was just like a dancing instructor with little kids. It's just silly, obviously, and you know, did they really not know? Did they really not know? Did they think it was okay because it was English? You got me. I've got no idea, but yeah, got a little bit of attention from the foreign web, and it's now rebounding back to the Japanese web that all these foreigners noticed it. But well, I guess it's the danger. I guess if you're children's presenters of a British or American show with Chinese characters all over it, yeah, you might want to check that stuff out. But I mean, Americans checking Chinese characters, I think, is very different to Japanese checking English characters. Fuck yeah, I love cock. I mean, this is, maybe she thought it meant I love the cook, because that's how they pronounce a chef in Japanese. I could, but then you've still got the she's never heard the word fuck before. I don't know how that happened, but yes, well, makes reading the news a little bit more fun, I guess. Ikumi Yoshimatsu, Miss International. Apparently, I didn't know this. I mean, there are so many of these Miss things, Miss Universe, Miss World. Apparently, there is a Miss International, which isn't run by Donald Trump, or it's actually run by a Japanese organization. Apparently, I've never heard of it, but there is. I don't know how long it's been around, but apparently the current Miss International is the first ever Japanese winner, even though it's a Japanese-run organization that never had a Japanese winner before. And she had a very, very interesting story, which Jake Adelstein was publishing on Twitter last night. The foreign, the Foreign Correspondence Club of Japan, the Foreign Press Club in Japan, had a press conference with her. I think it was yesterday or the day before. The day before the new Miss International was scheduled to be, and she gave her kind of story or expose, as it were, on the inner workings of the Japanese entertainment industry, and kind of victimization that she had suffered for not playing ball with, I think it's called Burning Entertainment, or Burning. It's the name of the. It's basically it is to Japanese entertainment what Jimmy Hoffa was to trucking in the whenever that was, the 1960s or the 1950s or the 1970s or whatever it was. They are the murky, probably mob affiliated center that is said to control the entire talent industry in Japan. The Geinokai, that is basically a union of actors, which is controlled through a whole bunch of, a whole maze of hundreds of small little talent agencies that are said to be controlled by one very small, low-profile entertainment agency, which, as this lady pointed out, on the OFAC, which is the United States Foreign, what do they call it, Secretary of State, the Foreign Department list of companies and entities that are associated with organized crime. And there are a lot of organized crime related scandals involving the talent industry in Japan and famous talents. And so she mentions that after she won Miss International and began appearing on television, she was put in a car with her manager by the head of the K1 promotions, a guy called Ishii. What's his first name? But K1 promoter guy. And they were taken to Burning Productions, and she was told that she would be now assigned to a talent agency, which would be this talent agency. And she decided she didn't want to do that because, she researched this apparently, and she found out later that these have these dodgy ties, and she wanted to keep her image clean. So she decided instead to set up her own talent agency and to try to operate in Japanese media and advertising outside of this talent agency kind of union system. And she's been subject since then to a campaign, as she describes it, of harassment stalking, in the sense that private detectives were hired to come and take photos, from the windows and peek inside her house and scare her and do things, and harassing phone calls to her family and harassing phone calls to her sponsors and TV shows to basically get her to either agree to work under for his agency for him, or to basically get her blacklisted. And it sounds like the blacklisting was successful to the point that after relentless intimidation of the actual Miss International organization, which is a Japanese organization, they asked her to pretend to be sick and to not attend the ceremony where she would hand over her crown to the new winner, which is meant to be tonight. And so she said at the press conference, well, she wasn't going to back down and she was going to show up to the thing, even though the sponsors and everyone didn't want her there because of this pressure which is being applied. Yeah, it was an hour long. It involved her speaking, and it's the first time I've ever watched a full interview at the Foreign Correspondents Club. She is quite hot, has to be said. I tweeted this yesterday, so I somehow could watch it for an hour. It also was introduced by Jake Adelstein, Japan's resident foreign news freelance Yakuza expert. And it's the first time I've actually, if you follow news and Twitter and all that sort of stuff in Japan, Jake is one of those larger-than-life personalities. I had mixed opinions of it first, although I must admit he's a good person to follow. He's connected with a lot of interesting people, and he's a smart guy, and he picks up a lot of insightful stuff. He's very connected to obviously the story, or to this lady. And yeah, it was interesting kind of hearing him talk for an hour. It's the first time I think I've heard him talk. I've never met the guy. I'd be interested to meet him. I'd be interested to even have him on our show at some point. He's a very high profile guy. He's written a book which I haven't read, but other people tell me is very good. Talks about the whole deal with how the Yakuza tattoos, they contain lead, which caused the kidneys to fail eventually, so they need to go to America. They all go to the University of California to get their kidneys transplanted, which the US allows them to do on temporary visas in exchange for giving the FBI information on organized crime activities in the States. Apparently this is a closed doors deal which he blew the lid off with a book, with a scoop that he had, and that kind of made, but before that he was a crime reporter with the Yomiuri Shimbun, I think, which is interesting in itself that he's a foreigner and he got to be in the crime section. This is where he develops his knowledge of Japanese organized crime, and he's a very interesting character. A little bit larger than life, must be said. But so yeah, he was talking, she was there. There's a fantastic expose on the dark side of the entertainment world presented by Neo-Japonism, which is another fantastic blog. They're not prolific, they don't publish a lot, but they publish really, really good and interesting stuff. And there was a 3-part series on the Japanese entertainment industry. If you're like me and you learn Japanese through watching dramas and Japanese entertainment, it's fascinating to understand how that really works and what that's all about. It's a very, very old-fashioned, controlled. It talks about burning and so on. If you really want to learn about how blackballing works in that industry as well, which it happens a lot, Ami Suzuki is a great person to Google about, maybe better in English than Japanese even, because they're so effective at removing this stuff as well and really, erasing their existence. Ami Suzuki, when I came to Japan, was probably the biggest, as big as Utada Hikaru or, Namie Amuro, as big as big gets in the Japanese. Like every release that she made was like a #1 hit. She was backed by Avex and Tetsuya Komuro. And she decided at some point she wanted to go independent, and not only that, but she felt like she was getting shortchanged by Avex, and so she sued her production company for not paying her what she was entitled to, and she got blackballed. And you would never even know that she had been born from when that happened, in spite of the fact she probably felt like she was sufficiently high up in the industry that she could get away with it, and she couldn't. So, it's a really interesting, kind of very deep thing. I don't know her story. She did a Japanese press conference, and apparently the story was temporarily picked up by Japanese web, and then it was removed. The story and the feature was removed from all of these websites, which she says is due to intimidation, basically from the Jimmy Hoffa type entertainment industry, that she's being blackballed, and people are being intimidated into not covering her story. So now she's given it to the foreign press. It'll be interesting to see if it's picked up. Her name is Ikumi Yoshimatsu, and it'll be interesting just to see if it pops up in the news, having heard that. That's all that I've got. I'm going to update the comments again, and then I'm going to round it out. So, just refreshing. My throat's a bit gone at the moment, but hope you're all well. What are your plans for 2014? I'm going to try to slowly build up and make more regular my content. So let's see. I just saw the comment that Toyota Centuries are not cars; they're yachts. They're cars. They're cars. I've been in some taxis that have them, and they're kind of, well, they're a little bit like yachts. You're probably correct on that slightly, but they're very nice, big, comfortable shacho limousines, presidential cars. Second-hand cars in Japan. Ahmed is asking, are second-hand cars cheap in Japan? Yeah, they're cheap. They're cheap to buy, but it's deceptive because the insurance costs, the registration costs they become higher as the cars get older. But coming from New Zealand, where a 10-year-old second-hand car can cost $10,000, or maybe less now, but it cost that much when I left. And you come to Japan, that same car is worth like $800 here. Sometimes, less than $1,000, especially if you can buy them at the used car dealer auctions. Which is a bit of you've got to have a connection to do that, but you're crazy cheap. But that said, it was more cheap back when there were only a couple of countries that they could export used cars to, and one of the first countries that you could do that with was New Zealand. But now, everywhere's been liberalizing their used car import laws, so we have now you can send them anywhere. And they're very popular in Russia, Europe, Africa, so the price of the used cars is probably going up, but that's because they can be exported out of the country. I'm just going to scroll down. Warren Baker is asking, he's saying that Japan's hardly a success story for wealth distribution. They have the highest debt per capita, which is true. The point is, it depends on what your aim of wealth distribution is. The debt, if you like, or the wealth is evenly distributed, relatively speaking. It's not evenly distributed, of course, but it's relatively evenly distributed. The question is whether that's your goal or whether it's to have the whole thing higher up. So, for example, is it tolerable to have less distribution, but to ensure that more people ensure more wealth, or is it better to just have a society that's more flat? When people talk about wealth distribution, of course, the idea of free market thinkers is that there shouldn't be wealth distribution. It should just be natural. And people think it should be controlled, then that's implying it should be flat, which is never how it works out, of course. But of course the debt's terrible, but as Ahmed mentions as well, it's locally leveraged. Whether that actually means anything is something still to be tested, but of course it's more indebted than Greece. But at the same time as all of this, like just today, Abe was in Mozambique promising $500 million of aid over the next 4 years to Mozambique in exchange for being able to get access to their gas reserves back. But I don't know, Japan goes around the world giving a lot of money away, but theoretically they are still the most indebted country in the world. Greece doesn't do that, but Japan does, and whether that's just because of the national debt holding, I don't know. 5% VAT, but yes, VAT is going to 8% in 3 months' time in April, and then it's probably going to get a 10% probably in another year. So it's going to double in the very near future, and everyone knows that, and it's going to be interesting if that's going to affect the economy worse as well. But yes, that is happening. Michael, thank you for submitting to Hikuzine on Flipboard. Check it out. I do have a link in the video information. Do that. I appreciate the feedback for that. And it's a nice little hobby. So please do that. Yes, Chris himself, Dennis Rodman. I did talk about Dennis Rodman. I don't know. It's like, to me, seeing Dennis Rodman in North Korea wearing sunglasses, singing happy birthday to Kim Jong-un just felt right somehow. Like, I don't know. Everything that guy does is like really weird and off the wall, but somehow North Korea just started to feel normal. I know that Busan Kevin was very critical of him being, I mean, he's a clown, and North Korea is just a big clown show, I guess. Oh man, what a mess, that whole thing. Well, that's what you get. I mean, Zeros Nico, Simpsons has changed. I mean, I don't know how they could keep it up for 25 years. It's inevitable it would change. But, well, it's a shame if it's not as good as it used to be. But, and this is why I think keep it short and funny and end it. That's my philosophy on how TV shows should be. But, yeah. So people talking about Simpsons and some people having some... so I see that Adrian Alvarez and Warren Baker are having some... discussion about debt and the economic situation in Japan. Well, in terms of talking about successive distribution of wealth in the society, I think you look at disparity and you look at the average life, say life level, quality of living. And Japan isn't at the top of any rankings. In fact, it's pretty set in the middle of the OECD, depending on how the measures that are used. There are different surveys that use different criteria. Some put it near the bottom, some put it near the top. I think there's no question that, regardless of the macroeconomic issues with Japan, that people are still, earning a relatively reasonable wage and have a reasonable cost of living. Not that it's necessarily the most attractive in the world. It's not a Scandinavian country or anything like that. The debt thing is a very, very scary issue, but at the same time, it's been a very scary issue for a long time. It's not getting better, of course. Abe is now, spending the money even more aggressively now and far beyond what's coming in, but time will tell. If it's going to collapse, it's going to collapse in a way that's going to bring down the whole world economy. And frankly, at the moment, all the fundamentals, Japan's unemployment, granted there's problems with the unemployment statistics here, they show like 4% unemployment or less, but there again there's a lot of people who, if you're unemployed for like more than 2 years, you don't show up in the statistics anymore, and there's a lot of people who are employed on temporary contract work or part-time work that are not included in unemployment statistics, but that's not enough, that are not earning enough money to support themselves. But it still is much, much better than Europe, where you have 20-30% unemployment, above 50% youth unemployment in countries like Greece and Spain. And you really have to wonder how those societies are going to continue to function. And, Europe and America at the moment. Europe's is the scariest. I mean, that whole thing could fall apart. And I think you talk about a society breaking down. Whatever happens with the markets and the debt, Europe is really scary to me at the moment. I don't understand how those countries, how Italy, and Italy's on the way there, France is on the way there, Spain is there. When you have like Italy, Spain, and France with like more than 50% youth unemployment, when 400 IKEA jobs in Spain get put out and 20,000 people apply, and the servers from the company collapse because of the applications for low-paying part-time jobs, it doesn't matter if the leverage debt is lower per capita than Japan. You've got a country that's really, really in trouble, and I feel terrible for them, and I really hope they can find a way to pull it out. Whatever the problems with Japan, they're not there. They're not at that level, but we'll see. So I'm going to wrap it up soon. Anything else? Any other interesting topics? I am back. The main thing in the UK as well, is it 50% youth unemployment in the UK? Is it that bad in the UK? That's crazy, isn't it? Well, this is the thing. So you talk about how it is on the ground. The numbers for Japan are terrible, and they've been terrible for a long time, but they're not like that. So yeah. And yeah, maybe we should be. I mean, a lot of people should be passionate about debt, and I don't think it's smart that they've gone to suddenly, pump priming after trying to, balance the budget for a long time. But there again, the Democrats tried to balance the budget very aggressively here, and it got them kicked. Well, I could go into that in a lot of detail. That was a big part of why they got kicked out, was that Japanese public wasn't really buying into the balancing the budget thing, and Abe's gone the other way. But no one's got a real solution for it yet. So yeah, that is really it. There are Tokyo governor elections coming up. One thing that's interesting is that former Prime Minister Hosokawa seems to be announcing that he's going to come back into the race. Don't know if it will be, if that's a good idea. It's kind of funny. Inose, the current governor, or the guy who just resigned, he's actually, I like him. I kind of feel bad for him that, it was just that he was naive. A lobby group gave him 500 grand that, he didn't use any of that money, and then he gave it back. But it was just the fact that he received the money in the first place didn't look good, and under a lot of pressure he resigned. A guy like Hosokawa, while he was prime minister and beforehand, took millions of dollars in bribes. And he's campaigning to replace the guy who was given $500,000 that he held for a while and gave back. But, you know, and you've got a Japanese SDF general who's running and is backed by Ishihara. And I think the Democrats or someone else are backing a guy who's like a former health ministry minister. And this is what stopped me voting or recommending my wife to vote for the Democrats in the Tokyo election, was that when you use ex-bureaucrats, they just campaign on one policy, which is just giving money to my old ministry. And this is what's happening. The general's saying, oh, I'm going to use Tokyo as a platform for raising awareness of the defense forces and the need for funding of them. The health ministry bureaucrats saying, I want a health policy-centered governance of Tokyo. And they're insulting us, and they're saying I'm going to give money to my friends as a policy. So I don't know. But yeah, Tokyo Sonata, everyone is saying the UK is bad, which is funny because, I mean, at least here, well, I guess that Greece and Spain and, you know, are taking more of the attention, but that's interesting to hear that it really is that bad. Oh, yeah. So, very good to see. I guess talking about current economics is a depressing way to end the conversation, but, you know, 2014 is going to be, I think it's going to be a good year. Oh, yes, I didn't mention, so I mean, they've never gotten this right before, but people who are monitoring the stress on the different fault lines around Japan are predicting that before the Japanese government, backed researchers are saying that there's a high possibility of a Nankai Trough earthquake before spring. The Nankai Trough is Japan's currently most over-leveraged and considered to be dangerous fault line, and it's much like the Tohoku one. They're talking about a quake that would happen not just in one spot, but all along a fault line extending from Kyushu all the way up to Kansai. It's happened historically once every couple of 100 years. We're a bit overdue at the moment, and it would cause a lot of tsunamis and a lot of all sorts of stuff, all hitting the coast, all the way from Kyushu to, you know, Nagoya, up to just south of Tokyo. It's been considered for a long time the worst case. It was the quake that everyone was waiting for when the Tohoku one happened, and now that's considered higher risk because of the extra pressure that's been mounted on the southern part of the fault from the Tohoku quake. It is scary. At the same time, they've always predicted these things, and they haven't come about the way that they've been predicted, but this is going to happen at some point, and in any case, it does remind everyone, and everyone should remember that as numb as you can be to hearing all the time about earthquakes and earthquake risk, make sure you've got a self-defense kit. You can buy them at Tokyo Hands. They have different valued ones, like $50 one, $70 one. The things to make sure you have: always keep lots of tin goods in the house, or, you know, like vacuum packed food. Just keep it in stock. Keep water in, and I know this because we had the big quake here and we had the nuclear scare and everything. Lots of water, lots of canned goods, lots of vacuum packed goods. Just keep it as stock. The stuff keeps for a long time. You don't have to have your whole diet based on it, but just keep it about. Toilets. Keep everyone who's been through situations of having no water, no gas, everything disconnected, and we had this even around Tokyo. Toilets, and I know this from Christchurch as well. I've got family in Christchurch that went through this. Toilets are the biggest thing. Camping toilets, you can get like packets, like 300 toilets that you can set up with cardboard boxes. The single biggest issue if you're and toilet paper. Toilet paper you can improvise, I guess, but yeah, that's like the biggest thing. Everyone thinks about food and water and all that sort of stuff, but toilets very quickly become the most important thing. But you can buy kits which contain all this stuff: hand cranked radios, torches, you know, some tin food, some emergency toilets, all that sort of stuff. Go and get yourself a pack. Always make sure that you know where your local. I've got like a map book around here somewhere with all of the evacuation zones for everywhere in Japan. If there's ever a quake and you have to aggregate somewhere, know that stuff for where you are. It's part of living in Japan that you've got to know. But especially, you know, if might not happen, but if the Nankai Trough is considered a high risk, just, you know, a lot of people are affected by that. Everyone in Kansai, everyone in Shikoku, all the Pacific coast of Kyushu. Just make sure that you know, be you know, civil defense aware. All of these quakes, Kobe quake, Tohoku quake, they all happen in winter. I don't know whether the season has anything to do with it, whether because the Earth is closer to the sun during the northern hemisphere winter, or whether it's because of the cold effects. I don't know, but they always seem to happen during winter, which strikes me as a really sucky time to have a really major earthquake. But make sure that you are protected and safe, and that you know all your local emergency information, and that you have a pack in your house. Even if you're just renting and you're not thinking too much about it and you think that you can fly out, trust me, you want to keep about a week's worth of emergency stuff just to cover yourself for any situation. It's part of living in Japan. That is about it from me. Hope you're all good. This is a longer show than I expected, but it's been a good chat. Sorry that 2 people disliked. I guess one of those was because I was late, or maybe they're just trolling, and that's cool. Whatever. CES. Yeah. I didn't talk about CES, but I've kind of posted on Facebook about it a bit. I'm not into CES this year. I don't need a 4K TV. I don't need a curved TV. The virtual reality stuff is interesting. It's been interesting since the 1980s. Hopefully they'll get there soon. The medical bracelets are interesting, but again, only when they can get to the point of diagnosing and not just monitoring your pulse and being pedometers. I mean, getting seriously like, you got a cancer cell in your pancreas, go and get it out now. Stuff which will actually let you, address and catch and cure stuff. That's when you get to the tricorder technology, which people are working on at the moment, a couple of years, that's going to be really, really interesting tech. The Google Glasses stuff is kind of interesting, but not interesting enough to be successful yet. 3D printers, they're not quite fully baked yet. A lot of stuff which is on the way, but I didn't really see anything from CES that really got me excited this year, which is just inevitable. Tablets and all this stuff. This will be very interesting to me when I can run Adobe Premiere on this, or I can just put my video and my photos straight from a memory card on this and look at it. The CPUs will be about another year or 2 before they can quite get to that point of being able to run a regular desktop OS on these kinds of, portable devices. So I'm looking forward to that, but 2014 doesn't have me all very excited about tech. Emergency be a very important accent. Yeah, that is about it. So I'm going to log out now. Of course, you can keep leaving comments and there's some good conversations going on about economic stuff and whatnot. But yeah. Have a good year, everyone. And I'm going to be back here every week, and I'm going to probably have one more regular video. And of course, 2.5 Oyajis, 10:30 Wednesday. My channel, I think, is the next one. So look forward to that. No plan at the moment. Bobby Judo wants to get on. My goal for this year is to have more Jake Adelsteins and Shisakus and kind of people not necessarily in the YouTube world on. And I hope you all have a good year. Peace. Stop streaming. Is it going to say I'm logged out? It's going to say I'm logged out. It does this. It logs me out partway through. It did this last time, so let's see if I can get it back. Stop streaming.